another of Welcome to another one of our PACT virtual events. PACT is an AHRC-funded project, pluralist agreement and constitutional transformation. We focus on ideas of constitution making and participation in constitution making through this project. And for those of you watching this recording, we have with us today Dr. Camila Vergara and Dr. Maciej Krogel, who I will introduce in a moment. Camila Vergara is senior lecturer at the University of Essex at the Business School. She holds a PhD in political theory with specialization in constitutional law from Columbia University. Before Essex, she was a fellow at the University of Cambridge. She is the author of a fascinating book called Systemic Corruption: Constitutional Ideas for an Anti-Oligarchic Republic, published by Princeton University Press in 2020. And her work on constitutional theory, republicanism, corruption, and populism has been published in leading international journals like the Journal of Political Philosophy and the History of Political Thought. She was the winner of the 2024 Early Career Prize awarded by the Britain and Ireland Association for Political Thought. But Camila doesn't just do academic work, she's also a global public intellectual with her articles and interviews featured in prominent progressive outlets. In addition to being an academic, Camila is an activist, advising and collaborating with grassroots organizations on rights, deliberative democracy, and community-based forms of governance. We're very pleased to have you with us today, Camila. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Udit, for this invitation, to Alice for organizing too, and to Maciej for giving comments later. So I am very excited to share the contents of my book. I have prepared a presentation, so it is more easily digestible. So first, the book, it was my dissertation, my PhD dissertation, a book that I basically was working on for around 10 years, I would say, going on and off. It was a book that was born in the Global South, from the Global South, in the sense that we have constitutions in Latin America, specifically where I am from, that are really oligarchic impositions, has always been. So there's no really kind of a myth of the ideal good constitution. They're just constitutions that are imposed by the ruling class. So there's less of a mystifying of the constitutional structure. So I wanted to kind of demystify the constitution itself and push for a new way of understanding the legal order and how can we kind of move away from oligarchy. So this is the index. I first start with the idea of political corruption as a way of kind of justifying this critique of the constitutional orders that we have. And then go into kind of criticizing and the history of the constitutional evolution by presenting another concept, which is material constitutionalism. How can we understand the constitution based on the material structure of society instead of just some legal order that is detached from reality? After that, in part two, I go into four authors who have been either demonized or marginalized because of their ideas. So it's kind of, I try to do like a side B of constitutionalism. So it's Machiavelli, Condorcet, Rosa Luxemburg, and Hannah Arendt. And basically what I do is analyze their projects or their ideas for a different kind of order that is really a democratic order and not oligarchic. And then I propose my own by criticizing and engaging critically with authors that have been trying to edit the mainframe now in the 21st century. So I start with the premise of political corruption. And here we see a map of the world based on the index of political corruption, the perception index. And we see that the majority of the countries around the world are really, really corrupt. And even the ones who are in a lighter shade, like the United States, for example, we know that it's very corrupt in terms of the amount of money that goes into politics. Are really, the corruption there is underestimated. Okay, so we have not really a way to measure corruption correctly because it is based on the perception of people of their own corruption in their own country, and is detached from legality and from the structure of society. So what I argue here, and this is the kind of the premise of the book, is that we are living in an oligarchic time. We are living in an oligarchic democracy, which is basically a regime in which the few are elected by popular vote, but they legislate and rule and adjudicate to benefit systematically the rich and powerful. So it's not that the powerful are bending the rules or are skipping the rules, right? They're violating the rules. No, they're making the rules for themselves, and the rules benefit them disproportionately. So this has allowed for the state to become itself an extractivist order in a way that legalizes corruption, legalizes this undue influence of the few in the government. And this, of course, allows for not only the extraction of and exploitation of the many, but also of nature. So I define here, and I go into the complexities of corruption by arguing there are three types of corruption. And this is, of course, not based on other people's work, on individual and institutional corruption. So what we have today in general in all institutional frameworks is the idea of individual corruption. We have people that are public officials who receive bribes, who are fraud, who appointed their relatives. And this is what we call corruption in general. People go to jail. We cannot put, institutions in jail. We need to put individuals. So this is the approach of the bad apples. We have a good system overall, but we have bad individuals that we basically plug out, use the juridical system, and put them away in order for the system to go on uncorrupted. However, we know that this is not really the case, that they are either whole institutions that work in a corrupt manner, in a way that their aims are distorted. There are authors that, like Dennis Thompson, who goes into this idea of institutional corruption. And I argue is kind of like that decaying branch of the tree. So we have the bad apples approach as individual. The institutional one is a decaying branch in which, for example, the healthcare system, and in the United States, for example, they have the private insurance-based system that actually is making people sicker and bankrupt instead of serving the public in terms of healthcare. The system itself is allowing the insurance companies to get very, very rich and the people to get sicker and not be able to access the system. So the institutional system of healthcare is corrupted in this way. It has a distortion. However, this is not only sectorial, but is, I argue, systemic, in the sense that there is structural domination going on. The rules of the game are, as I said, disproportionately benefiting the few. And this is not just a few rules, it's how the system works. So when we talk about the game being rigged, this is what we're talking about, that the rules and procedures and institutions are working for the few, not the many. So I argue this is a rotten tree. So how many branches are going to be rotten? How many apples are going to be rotten before we think about the tree as being rotten, as being corrupted? So here, systemic corruption for me concerns the structure of society, not the agents specifically. It's independent from legality, is intrinsically related to inequality, and it's a slow-moving process of oligarchization of society. So it's little by little, and therefore, when we encounter this kind of corruption, we cannot really measure it because it happens in the long run and it goes under the radar of the majority of methodologies to basically measure corruption. So I go into the history of political thought to kind of unearth this idea of systemic corruption before the 18th century, when the individualist idea of corruption came along. So here we have Plato, who that basically argues. Sorry, I got that. Oh, so I had this interactive thing that I know how it works very well. So okay. So basically, he argues that the order of society, there's no constitutional order that will remain uncorrupted. There are orders that are based on some principles, and these principles tend to degrade. And basically, he connected this to kind of the law of thermodynamics, which is, of course, modern, but is this idea that the more liberty you have in your order, and the more you can appropriate power based on property, the more the kind of contours of the order will degrade, and it eventually will mutate into a different order, which is more and more corrupt. So you have different orders based on honor, wealth, and then democracy, which for him degrades into anarchy. And of course, Plato was not a democrat. He was part of the oligarchic faction, and he was in favor of the coup d'etat in ancient democracy in order to establish a more oligarchic system. And then we have, of course, Aristotle, who had another idea of corruption, not something that is ideal, that basically corrupts in this fashion, but that all orders are made of different principles, of different elements. And he argues that there is a principle of diversifying antithesis. We have orders that have principles that are not really compatible in a way, or they cannot be merged or fused. They always can be, their proportions can be changed depending on the environment in a way, and the forces within. So we can have a perfectly balanced constitution that with time starts corrupting by aggrandizing one part or one principle of the constitution and undermining others. And this is basically what he argues, is that our democracies today, or the idea of democracy or the perfect regime, is the politeia, which is a combination of two different orders, the two corrupt orders for him, the oligarchic order and the democratic order. So basically the ideal order is the one that combines these two degraded orders in order to kind of fight it out and contain themselves. So for him, the mixed constitution that he proposes, the politeia, is based on, first, on inequality of wealth. There's no kind of leveling rules. However, there's a formal equality in government, that everybody formally can be a part of the ruling class. For him, when people actually do access the government, this is a part of a corruption, because it's an aggrandizing of the kind of democratic part of the order. For him, also very important is the middle class, is the majority. So we have the extremes, and really what is holding the government together is the middle, and the majority are property owners. This is kind of a requirement for this politeia to stay, in a way, uncorrupted. Then the third author that I use is Polybius, who is a Greek historian that is looking at the Roman Republic. And for him, the good government is not the combination, as Aristotle, of the two perverse or corrupted form of governments, but of the ideal forms of government, the best: monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy. So there is a combination of these three elements. So for Polybius, and we can say that here is kind of the Roman Republic, we have the Senate, the consuls. The Senate is kind of the financial power, the consuls as the executive power, and the plebeian council as the legislative power. They are basically in balance, says Polybius. However, this turns to corrupt when one or many of this, or both of this powers become aggrandized, and one of them becomes really minimized, not in paper but in reality. Okay, and so today, what do we have? Today, as I argue in the book, we have a kind of an oligarchic democracy, which is a corruption of liberal democracy, which is a combination of two principles. One is kind of the government of the majority, in a way, the elected representatives elected by the majority, and the other is the majority will, right? Then there are a contraposition. There's not really the same. One elects the other, but we have seen the elected few tend to not govern for the majority. And then we have all of this kind of contained by a system of individual rights and separations of powers. We have this idea of the law containing, the powers within and the struggles. However, this containment has been eroded, and we have only formal individual rights, and that cannot be really enjoyed by all of us in an equal manner. So we have two forms of corruption of this liberal structure. One is the populist corruption, that is basically the aggrandizement of the majority will part of the system, in which the majority could, in a way, in an authoritarian manner, if you will, and here authoritarian is not really bad thing, but really kind of a directive, a form of direction of the system that bypasses some of the hurdles that had been put to preserve the structure. Is aggrandized. So basically, the people are the one ruling, and they have trespassed some of the formal rules of the system. On the other hand, we have oligarchic democracy, in which things are preserved formally, but really are the few who govern, and they are trespassing the rules all the time. But there's not really kind of a direct confrontation with the system, because they are the ones governing the system. So I argue here that we need to think about the Constitution in other terms. We need to think about the Constitution in a material sense. And here I use three authors. First, Machiavelli. Machiavelli, of course, very demonized theorist. He takes this idea of systemic corruption. He calls universal corruption. And for him, when a polity has reached the point of systemic corruption, in which the few have control, there's oligarchic capture of government, then what you need is a republican renewal. And the only way to do that is to invoke basically that constituent power from below. The idea that the system needs to be renewed periodically, and also at will by the many, and with the help of the one, in a way. There is a combination here with the leader and the many in order to reset the system, to preserve plebeian liberty, the liberty of the many. And for him, that's crucial, not only the renewal, but the incorporation of new anti-oligarchic institutions. This is the only way that we can go back to the beginning, he says, to liberty, in a way, because the power of the few have been so strong that you need new institutional frameworks and infrastructures in order to keep that power at bay. And for him, how he understands corruption is not an individual thing, because he says basically humans are fickle, and we are prone to basically go for our own interests. This is just human, in a way. And the more liberty that the order allows for, the more we will become corrupted or acquainted, in a way, with the order. So today we have consumerism, for example, just shaping our understanding of politics. We consume politics. We basically vote for parties or platforms based on advertisement. This really has permeated our understanding of politics. For him, that citizens are not guilty of this, but we need to think about, one, the forms, so the law and the institutions, but more importantly for him, the methods. How the methods of allocating power in this order are at the base of corruption. We have the method understood as the procedures, and he is very interesting. He highlights two of, for him, the pillars of the system, which tend to basically allow for democracy on the one hand, and on the other for the corruption of democracy. First, elections as something that is, everybody could be, an elected official. Everybody could put their name forward. However, what happens in reality is only the powerful who have time and money put their name forward. So it is the illusion that we all can participate, while only the few can participate. And the same happens with freedom of speech. He says it's great that anyone can put forward a new law or a new regulation or speak against it, because this allows for dynamism in the system. However, what happens is that the ones with education and enough rhetoric and enough reach, they will be the ones who will set the agenda. So he's kind of prefiguring here the idea of hegemony that comes along with Gramsci after that. And then I use Marx. And for Marx, of course, we know he's against capitalism as a system of domination. And for him, capitalism is not only an economic system, but it's a system that is enabled and underpinned by the Constitution. There is kind of a blending of the economic and the political at this point. So for him, constitutions in general are sources of regularity. These are orders that we create, are patterns, and are in a way a reflection of what we have in reality of society. And for him, there's two different constitutions. The political constitution, which is basically the legal framework, the abstraction that we have created, we can talk about constituent, the separation of powers and different institutions, the law. But this constitution is not really real in the sense that it is only formal. It doesn't need to really translate into reality. For him, the material constitution is what is important, which is the structure of power in society and the material principles that emerge from these relations. So in a way, there is a gap between the political or the formal constitution and the material constitution. And his work, he tries to basically bring this together. And he says the only real constitution is the democratic constitution, in which the political is equal to the material. And in this sense, it is the people themselves that have a part in ruling, and not just, they rule by proxy, which is this kind of abstraction. So here, and I'm going to go a little bit kind of fast for you to see what I do in the book, which I try to trace, and I try to kind of visualize the constitutional structures throughout history. So what I did is a kind of a survey of the different popular governments and their constitutional structures throughout history to see how our form of government and our constitutional structure fares in comparison. Okay, so I basically did this kind of round circle understanding of this society, in which the few are on the top and the many are on the bottom, and see how where are the institutions located and who are the members actually exercising power. So we have Rome in the 4th century, where the plebeian council had a lot of power of legislating, of veto power. Is really remarkable in the sense of the machinery of the legal machinery in Rome that allowed for the plebeians, basically the people without nobility and power, to exercise power in the political realm. However, this Rome then in the late Republic starts to change materially. So before the plebeian tribunate, who were the exclusive representatives of the working classes, basically were part of the working class. However, 2 centuries into this order, the plebeian elite becomes to emerge, and they start to fuse with the nobles. So they start with intermarriage, with the magistrates and all the kind of offices being now open to plebeians. Before, it was always only the nobility who could be consuls, for example, or censors. Now the plebeians, due to legal reform, could be part of that structure. So the moment that they become part of the structure, becomes an elite to emerge, and the power of the real plebeians, of the people, in a way, starts to decrease, because the representatives start behaving like the nobility. Then the other popular government that is very interesting is the one of Florence, and how Machiavelli thought about the constitutional order for his own republic. So here we see that the Great Council was a council that was kind of middle class, if you will, not really plebeian, but in the middle. And basically they had all the power. It was a sovereign assembly that had to basically affirm great changes, and selected other all the magistrates. And this is here we see in purple his innovation, the provosts, who were basically a group of plebeian representatives who were selected by lot, who were there to exert a surveillance power, a monitoring power over government. So it's not only about electing the people that rule and okaying their decisions, but actually making sure that those decisions are executed in the correct manner, and correct being here pro people, pro many. Then I go into the Constitution of England, and how, again, this kind of, and we understand that separation of powers and all this doctrine is based on the English Constitution, as this ideal of separation of powers between the king and the commons, or the people. And we have a structure that is really oligarchic, that is sold as a narrative that is popular, but is not really the case. So the House of Commons is born in the 14th century, but even though it was named the House of Commons, the only commons that could inhabit that infrastructure, that institution, were people from wealth. So there were only the people were conceived legally as the property owners. So anybody that didn't own property were not part of the commons in the legal sense, and therefore all of the institutions were, the members were property owners and therefore defending their own class. And then very similarly to this, is the Constitution of the United States. Basically, at the beginning of the founding, we have that the structure of separation of powers kind of worked well because it was based on, again, property owners. But because of, settler colonialism, we have 80% or 70-something% of the white population being property owners, yeoman farmers. So they really had a possibility, a real possibility of becoming elected officials and to have a closer control over the representatives. So it was a more vibrant, in a way, polity. However, with time, the property owners only became part of like the 20%, as today it really is the 20 or 10% of people that actually own property, and the majority are just in debt, if you will. And today we know that the plebeian or the working classes, the just regular people, have very little influence on who is going to govern and in which way. So in a way, it is kind of an illusion of power, if you will. And then I go into this kind of innovations that are born out of revolutionary periods. First, I overview the proposition by the Marquis of Condorcet. He was the president of the Constitutional Committee in the National Assembly during the French Revolution. And he basically wrote the 1793 Constitution. That was never implemented, but still is something that we need to think about, because it was not implemented due to kind of a crisis of power, not because it was a faulty constitution. And for him, he criticized the American structure, because he says the separation of powers, the only thing that it does, allows for an indirect despotism of the few. For him, the only ones who could actually control and make decisions in this manner, sovereign decisions, were the people themselves. And the only way to do that is for the people to assemble at the local level where they are. And during the French Revolution, the people in all around France, they actually assembled in what is called the primary assemblies, the village assemblies, to draft letters of demands for the new government, in a way, for the new structure. And people were already meeting, so he wanted to institutionalize what was already happening, kind of an extra legal manner. So it's not an innovation out of like nothing, but actually giving some regulation and connecting these assemblies in a network, a decentralized network that would be the sovereign, in a way. That he wanted to really give an infrastructure to the people themselves to be able to exercise their power and be active agents. And he also has this kind of innovation, again in purple in the middle, the Council of Overseers, because for him, the devil really is in the details, in the sense of the enforcement. Sometimes for him, you can pass really great laws that will never be implemented, or they will be implemented discriminatorily. So therefore, you need an overseer institution that is selected by the people, that will be able to monitor what is happening at, their ruling structure. And then I go into two kind of ideas of constitutions that were not really formal constitutions, but they're really interesting because of kind of the different ways they're coming from. One is Rosa Luxemburg's ideas for the Worker Council Republic in the beginning of the 20th century. For her, the structure of government of separation of powers is always oligarchic. There's nothing to do with it. There's not people there. It's just, the few. So therefore, the people needed to create their own structure. And again, she says that it's not village assemblies this time, but workers' councils that need to be connected. And they have to have some kind of coordination at the top. And she calls a national council, which will be basically interfacing with the party as a revolutionary party, and not as a representative party, but as a delegate organ, in the sense that decisions are made in the local levels, and they are basically aggregated in this manner. And when there is a decision coming from the ground up, from the grassroots, the party takes it up and then basically pushes it into the governmental structure. Okay, so it is really kind of a top and bottom up approach to creating a new kind of republic. And then Hannah Arendt in the 20th century, she also kind of is a critique of a representative democracy. For her, representative government is always oligarchic and is not really democratic. It's just a function. It is for her, representative government is administration of things in a way, and that is not politics. Politics for her is judgment. Political judgment is, you know, the power that individuals need to be exerting, and they needed to do it in the collective. So again, for her, there needs to be councils everywhere in which people can access spaces in which they can deliberate and make decisions. And this would be basically directing the administration part. But parties are not political in this sense. And for her, we shouldn't be even engaging in this kind of politics. We really need to be basing on the kind of deliberative democracy from below. And this democracy from below is completely connected to the idea of constituent power. The idea that people can't make decisions beyond what exists, this legal order that has been created and edited by the oligarchy to serve themselves. So here I'm finishing up with this. In the later part of the book, I propose a new structure of a new kind of mixed constitution that is material, that incorporates a new form of plebeian institutions that are not really wealth-based, but they are channel the sovereign will of the people through decentralized mechanisms. So I argue that we need to think about incorporating into our structure. So there's many theories that say, okay, let's abolish the Senate. Let's do a unicameral thing. Let's not have a president. Let's have this be replaced by a citizen assembly. And I agree that would be a desirable thing to do. However, it is not enough, since we saw in the Roman Republic how time allows for this kind of structures to be corrupted. You need to have some power coming from below. So I argue then we need to incorporate to the existing structure another set of institutions. And I argue they need to be a network of local assemblies with different powers. So, for example, the power to initiate law and public policy, to veto and repeal, to recall and start impeachment, and to initiate a constituent process. And this doesn't mean that you would have complete absolute kind of a power to do whatever you want, because of course we are all bound by international law and the human rights system that it needs to be respected, because this at the bottom, at the base of democracy, and therefore there needs to be some kind of relative binding, if you will, of the public, but there needs to have binding power towards the structure of government. And of course, you cannot have a network of local assemblies without having a head not to direct, but to interface with the ruling structure. And for that, you need a kind of tribunate, a new form of representative institution that is really not representative with an open mandate, a free mandate, but with imperative mandate. So the people would be directing this institution, and this institution will be based on coordination of these decisions, on the enforcement of these decisions, on monitoring government, and also to serve as an anti-corruption institution in which you can channel cases of corruption, not through the legal system, which we know that is very difficult to actually put people in prison for their corrupt acts, because basically it's very difficult to follow the money at that point. But we know that they are corrupt because they haven't been serving the public. You shouldn't go to jail for that if you're a negligent, or we think that you're corrupt because you're making bad decisions, but you should be out of office. So there has to be a political procedure for getting rid of bad representatives and not be bound to whatever decision we made 4 years ago to just endure a representative when the people, they have lost the trust of the people. And here, this is how it would look like in a way. We have on the top representative government, which is, you know, the members of that the judicial, the legislative, and the executive branch. They're all part of the richest 20% of the population, and this is the reality everywhere in a way. So we already have that on the top. We can do very little to actually edit that. And even if we incorporate working class people with their common sense in a way into that structure, they will always be in the minority. So therefore, let's not waste our political capital in doing that. So we should have a very complex, in a way, structure below in which people have regular interactions and they learn how to deliberate and make decisions in a way and become smarter citizens and cease to be political consumers of politics and become actual agents of power in a way. And this is kind of the idea that we need to, and one of the things that I argue is that we need to switch elections, which are a vehicle for corruption due to all campaign finance. And we know now, for example, in the UK, where there's not this kind of culture of public campaigning and campaign contributions like in the US. However, we know now that the Israeli lobby had given £4 million to the Labour Party. And it's the largest donation ever in the history of the Labour Party and on UK politics. So we're seeing that money is really getting into the electoral process, and therefore we cannot reproduce these procedures that are oligarchic into the institutions that are plebeian in a way, that are for the common people. So we should be selecting by lot through the voluntary basis or the people that are willing to serve, and not really, and have a kind of larger collective offices instead of just one person that could be co-opted and corrupted. That's it. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Camila. That was great. I'm now going to hand us over to Maciej Krogel, who is a lecturer in European law at the Faculty of Humanities at the University of Amsterdam. Maciej holds a PhD from the European University Institute in Florence and has been a fellow in the Reconstitution Programme. He is an editor of the European Journal of Legal Study and has lectured in European Union law and comparative law at universities in Belgium, Denmark, Italy, and Portugal. His research interests are in constitutional theory, constitutional law of the EU, and the political and social roles of legal scholars. Over to you, Maciej.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. And also, it's a great pleasure to comment on a book that is not only significant in itself, but also very inspiring to me. And I know that not only to me. And great pleasure to be with you and at your project today. And I would like first to explain how I see the philosophical and theoretical significance of Camila's book, and then maybe explain why it should be of broader interest to scholars, but also practitioners who are interested in constitution making and lawmaking, more broadly understood. And thirdly and lastly, I will ask some questions to Camila, or maybe give some topics for discussion that I still see is not fully maybe answered and not fully, at least, understood by myself while reading the book, and I very much count on discussion here. So as I interpret Camila's book, it's on the one hand, it's very normative, very prescriptive, proposing us some very interesting paths to take. But on the other hand, it's also more descriptive and more theoretical, in the sense that it reinvigorates this very classical, very ancient thinking about constitution. And as Camila started from discussing Plato and Aristotle, we could see this very theoretical sociological ancient thinking of constitutions as intrinsically deteriorating or degrading. Whether we want it or not, constitutions are in the process of degradation just when we leave them like that. And underneath our institutions, our procedures, our formal rules, there is this process of deterioration, of crisis, if you will, of backsliding, if you will. That's a popular catchphrase recently. But it's systemic, it's very widespread, it's intrinsic to constitutions. So I think it's very significant that Camila's book is reinvigorating this style of thinking about constitution and also updating it. And what is maybe most important, that it's not only focused on concrete jurisdiction or a concrete region, but also inspiring us to think of constitutions this way more broadly. And why this particular style of thinking about constitution is important and is worth updating is that the dominant trend is very different. So we would rather think of corruption and political corruption and constitutional crisis in a much more static way. So not deterioration, but something that is static, that is set in stone, that is well-known and predictable, is desirable. And all indicators and statistics and patterns of good institutions and formal rules that we need, that we aim to achieve, that is that most scholars are focusing on, and that is what we use in our normative agenda for reforming constitutional institutions. But actually the book proposes, and this more broad theoretical approach proposes, to look at constitutions again as inevitably deteriorating, and now we rather need to respond to it rather than aiming at static and well-established democracy. And here comes the more normative tone or prescriptive tone of Camila's book, which is indeed installing or incorporating an external to the system power, constitutional power, within a republic. And as Camila said, apart from our proposals for reforms and for refining of of institutions that we have right now, we should also think, if we want to really reform the republic, we should also think of a different body of institutions to install in our system. A body that would really involve citizens, and that would be a counterweight to the oligarchic system. And this is remarkable because it differs from most of the normative projects that focus on deliberative democracy and the deliberative involvement of the people, and all the nodding towards the people in the institutions that we already have. All the projects of further democratization by giving voice to the people, by hearing to them. I think Camila says in her book, this is not enough. It's important to give voice to the people and to listen to them in the process of deliberation. However, we should also think of the real material power that these institutions will have, and they can exercise this power through the instruments mentioned at the very end by Camila, the set of instruments of political responsibility, and so on. So I think that this, in many ways, radical normative proposal is what is distinct about the book, and which invites us to thinking of how we can reform our constitutions beyond deliberative democracy and beyond just broadening up the space of consultation. And also it's worth to note how Camila is criticizing the neo-Republican threats of thought in her book. Neo-Republican, very much in tune with popular liberal political theories that say that the republicanism today should be based on the active role of citizens who are vigilant, who try to control their institutions. And this is not enough, again, because individuals do not have enough power and possibility, and very often enough time and money to control a complex system of oligarchic power. And that's why Camila suggests, as I understand it, indeed the incorporation of a counterpower to the system. And Camila mentioned that Machiavelli is very often maybe misunderstood, or has this sort of black legend around him. And I think that also other authors that Camila mentions, even Karl Marx, can be here a bit worrisome to the broader audience, that we are relying so much, or Camila is relying so much on his theory of material constitutionalism. And many readers would ask, okay, is it for me if it's this sort of Marxist constitutional theory? But I think that indeed, even if readers or scholars or practitioners are not very much into the Marxist thought or the Rosa Luxemburg's thought, I think this book is still can be still very inspiring for them, because first of all, because Camila really takes from these authors what is most valuable in the thought about the power to the people and power to the councils of people and the mobilization of the people that that can be worthy our attention and our thinking of how to mobilize people today in our jurisdictions, and really how to reform our institutions rather than overturning them in revolution. And secondly, even though Camila is very sensitive in her book about the economic discrepancies and inequality, what I find very positive in a book, in an argument, is this connection between the economic and social inequalities and political inequality, or political division into oligarchy and common people, so to say. So I think that this is very convincing, that we here not only focus on the economic inequalities and the economic question of how to change this dramatic situation of the many, but also that we have inspiring proposals for how we can move politically towards the mitigating the oligarchy and doing something productive with the current predicament of inequality. So this is more or less how I understand the argument of Camila, and I wanted to ask maybe two questions that are very interrelated, and which again it's not the vice of the book that I find this question still there unanswered, but it's rather that the book so much inspires these two questions, and I would like to propose them for discussion. So first of all, and this is very practical, is that this normative proposal for normative suggestion for incorporating the counterpower, the counterweight into the system, I think practically speaking requires huge mobilization of resources, and especially at the fiscal level. And so I would like to ask Camila how the system itself can produce these resources, or even more importantly, can allow us to mobilize these resources for the change of the same system. So how we can change the system by incorporating the effective power of the people, while the system is corrupt itself already, as we know, and the resources are misused to a large extent. So in other words, how to do this practically, because if you read the book, you can see that even if Camila suggests very interestingly and very, I think very effectively, she suggests solutions for the daily operation of the system, I think still it requires a lot of logistical effort and much of financial effort to arrive at this system of dual power that controls each other. And then also related question, I think. So the first was mobilization of resources, but I have also thought of mobilization of character, I would say. So mobilization of character of the people. And Camila is reinterpreting most of the tradition of Republican political thought. But what is very common to this, and very prevalent in this tradition, is also the focus on the character and virtue and individual virtue, and the huge role that individual character and also attitude and habits and the responsibility of individuals, the role that it plays in the reforming of the system. So I would like to ask Camila, what would be the blueprint here for indeed training the virtue of citizens, and whether it plays a role in your theory, and to what extent, and how it connects maybe to the blueprint for reforming the institutions. So you powerfully criticize the virtue that it plays the role in neo-Republican liberal theories. You criticize it for being very individualistic, for being, as you mentioned in your presentation, consumerist to a large extent. But what would be your vision here? I'm very curious. And with this, I think I would like to open these questions for discussion. And with this, I would like to thank you again, and looking forward to your reactions.
Over to you, Camila. Thanks a lot, Maciej.
Yeah, thank you for those great comments and questions. So I think I'm going to answer kind of a collective. I'm going to merge the two because I think they're related. So in terms of resources, there's the ideal and what can be done, right? So ideally, we would have the same as in ancient democracy, when Pericles basically allowed for paid attendance into the assembly, in which the working classes get paid for their service. That would be the ideal. And for me in the book, I have been trying to collaborate with people that are in favor of the universal basic income, in terms of not just giving people money just for existing, but actually for doing politics at the local level. So to be paid when you go to your local assembly, and to be able to exercise your deliberation without any cost, in a way. We can talk about national holidays. We have holidays of all kinds. In Latin America, we have like 17 or something holidays devoted to the Virgin and other saints. We can actually devote some public holidays to deliberating. And I think that kind of is the money or resources that you need. You need a space, right? You need a space to meet. However, in my work in Chile during the constituent process, we understood that ideal could actually convert it into a real without much money, in a way. You can meet on a Sunday when people do not work, right? Of course, there's still working class people that work on Sundays, but the majority of people have some time. You can actually pool resources in order to have food to share. Community centers are free and they're everywhere. You have senior centers, you have community centers that basically can be repurposed for political action at least once a week. So you can use resources that are already there. Okay. Ideally, you would pay people. Ideally, you would have all these, resources for shared, interaction. However, you can do it with the minimal. Okay. This is my understanding. But what you need, most importantly, is a ground zero. You need places in which you can actually do this at the local level, because what is more important, other than the resources, is the political will to give the assemblies binding power. So I've been thinking about municipalities or neighborhoods in which you have a mayor maybe that could campaign, that could be part of the movement of grassroots democracy, who would come to power in a very small place and say, okay, I'm going to basically give some regulation to this system, and I will do whatever comes out of that network of assemblies. So in a way, the leader needs to give power, needs to devolve power to the people. And that, for me, is the most difficult thing. But when you manage to elect someone to the power in a local setting that will do this and will edit the code of the municipal government in order to incorporate this infrastructure and to devolve this power to the people, then you can have a place where this kind of mixed constitution at the local level can actually work. And for there, you can have many of these experiments. And this, I would say, we need to go with Hannah Arendt in the sense that these are islands of liberty. They're islands of democracy in which the people can actually be agents of power, right? And not basically do administration. It's not about the people taking power, as the Marxists would say, right? We need to take over the state and then, we will create. No, we actually need to do it from the ground up. And the germ of the new society is in the councils, is in the collective. So for me, the second question is, how do you train people? Is through a pedagogy that starts in the action. So political action, the space of political action, is in itself a form of democratic pedagogy. And I also saw it in Chile, in which people with no previous affiliation or organization practice at all, that they don't even vote, they were completely out of the political system, they got together in their local squares in the public space, and they basically created their own councils. And in that process, they became political agents. And all the interviews that I did, basically, they all said that they were transformed to the core in who they are and who they think about, how they think about the world. In a way, they think about the world now in the collective, at the neighborhood level, as we can do things in a way, and we are different from power, right? So this is something that really changes. And also it has to do with the research that has come out on citizen assemblies. So there are a lot of tracking of the individuals that have been involved in the citizen assembly process, elected by lottery, that had come up with initiatives all these people are reporting that they feel their level of happiness and their level of, fulfillment as individuals and kind of empowerment is very high just after, this experiment. However, after they cease to be in that space and they, in addition, power doesn't care about what they have decided, they basically become depressed. And this is kind of all around. So the different organizations, for example, there's a NGO called Democracy Next. They're trying to push the citizen assembly model. They want to do citizen assemblies as a permanent institution in order to keep this momentum going and to keep, people being agents and not real consumers of politics. So I think that is the way to do it, because we cannot, and Rosa Luxemburg was very right in this, we cannot make the revolution with individualist, egoistic people. We are all indoctrinated by the system into becoming individual consumers of politics and only wanting our own interests. So in order to change that, we really need to do it at the meta level and the individual level. We need to really, it's a kind of almost a metaphysical change that happens in people when they engage in collective decision making. So I think that is, and that Hannah Arendt called it the miracle in a way, that we don't know what's going to happen. We get together, we brainstorm, things come out that are completely out of the bounds. And this is what is constituent power in a way. So I think these two questions are related. We need these spaces in which people are going to meet to create their own ethics in a way, to that people get educated into another form of being. We have the oligarchic ethics of, gaining money, to being rich and famous, to, have the most, the most, to buy the luxury cars. This is what we have to become, a millionaire without working. This is kind of the ethics of today. So we need to change that. And that needs to be changed in these communitary spaces. And the people themselves need to be agents of their change. There's no other way around it as I see it. Thank you.
I'll go back to Maciej if you have a follow-up, but I also wanted to pick up from a point that Maciej made about the kind of virtues required for the kind of models that you're proposing, Camila. I guess one worry is that, and I'm of course speaking as a sympathizer of this kind of new wave of plebeian constitutionalism, and it's something I've been pushed on as well, and I'm hoping you'll supply us with the answers. That plebeian constitutionalism has the drawbacks that kind of people with nostalgia for working class kind of politics have. Where is the plebeian identity, right? And the plebeian, those who would be part of this plebeian identity, the way you'd like to shape it, are themselves so internally fractured that places at risk any form of solidarity that would be required for the proper functioning of plebeian institutions. So the hope is, of course, we'll develop this through the kind of bottom-up mechanisms that you're proposing. But the critique, I think, then is the kind of social material basis for those identities is just gone. You're not going to be able to build it, which I think is too pessimistic. But I'd like to hear from you on that.
Yes, thank you. So one of the things that I didn't mention about kind of the reality of things, that of course you need to have kind of a councils and assemblies where people meet. However, we already have kinds of institutions like that, like unions, for example, in which people actually meet and make decisions. They're based on their own interests as a group. However, it's already happening. So I think we need to be respectful of what exists. We cannot just, come out of our minds and say, this is the correct way. We need to think about a kind of a constellation or an ecosystem of, plebeian institutions, broadly understood. And of course, identity comes actually from action, I would say, because we don't share this, very little that we share other than our material conditions. There's ethnic markers are way stronger than class markers or what we experiment in our daily life. So we have to kind of create an identity out of very thin similarities, if you will, similarities that they only become stronger when we share them. So in Chile, it happened that everybody basically were either unemployed, in debt, with all kinds of problems. And they came together to the square. At the beginning, they were sharing, their grievances. And the more they shared their grievances, they understood that it was not their fault. If everybody has the same problem, it is a shared problem because it's the system's fault. So that created a kind of a glue for the people that didn't know each other before. They were neighbors and never said hi before for 20 years. So basically that created a bond by the sharing of grievances and by the action of doing something to change that. So I think it is connected, the identity, to what is called the event. So plebeian identity cannot really emerge out of just, rationally understanding that we are in the same kind of boat. We really need to be triggered by something that involves the body, in a sense that we need to perform a kind of role that we haven't performed before, which is a political role, a real political role, right? So in a way, the people come together when they have something, a common issue. So if you, as a community, has a problem, for example, with pollution, that you need to push back against a company or something that is triggering some kind of upsetting your community, then doesn't matter who you vote for. Doesn't matter what you think about other issues. You will come together around that single issue. And in that coming together, the polarization will basically be bridged. And there are also kind of experiments about this, about how people really in the assembly, they empathize with the neighbors, with others, in a way, with their own stories and their own sharing, and basically brainstorm and make possibility and hope a reality, in a way. And that is something that brings people together, and that create a new kind of identity and a new kind of ethics of critically engaging with the moral rules that we have today, which are immoral in a way. So we need to really kind of come with the new principles that come from the actual collective organization. So I'm a great believer of this. I think when you do the research, you see that this happens at the individual and group level. And we need to engage in that, I would say.
I mean, I guess I'm very sympathetic to that. One thing that might also complicate this sort of process is that the oligarchs do try and kind of emphasize division, right? Reinforce division. Think of the press kind of going after immigrants, for example. And the worry then is that the more salient plebeian institutions become, the greater the incentive to hasten this process of reinforcing division. So it's not just that this is a hard process. There are the very forces that we're trying to oppose through plebeian institutions will work against fracturing the kind of identity required to kind of lubricate these institutions.
Yes, and I agree. And this is why when we think about anti-oligarchic constitutionalism or plebeian constitutionalism, constitutionalism from below, it cannot be an idealist vision. Like, oh, we all come together, kumbaya, this is not, we need to immediately think about defending ourselves. Because in a way, you're putting a foreign object that has a different logic into an oligarchic system. A CEO of administration would say, a CEO of oligarchic power, and we come with this kind of newborn in a way. And we need to think immediately how we're going to interface with the system and how we're going to protect ourselves. And that's why from the very beginning, there needs to be anti-oligarchic rules in the kind of basic constitution of these assemblies. I saw it very closely in Chile, in which, parties are really oligarchic machines. And they permeate everything. The moment you have people coming together, they send someone basically to infiltrate and to co-opt and to kind of deviate the energy. So one of the rules that they came up immediately was that whoever was part of this assembly first needed to disclose if they were militants of a party, they were actually members of a political party, and that they will exclude people who were actually working for political parties. If you were a political operative or you work for a politician or staff of any kind, you cannot be in an assembly. You are part of power. So exclusion from these assemblies is also allowing for, one, identity formation, but also protecting yourselves from the system. And of course, you cannot defend yourself from fake news and the social media. This is happening. It's uncontrollable in a way. The only thing that you can do is to educate people to be able to spot things that are, fake, or they're against their interests, and also to kind of cross information. So basically, the only way that you're going to not be the prey of fake news and polarization and division, because it's this from a time immemorial has been like this, and we can talk about the populist movement in the US at the end of the 19th century, in which there was a rainbow coalition basically with former slaves and white tenants of farmers against the plutocracy, and immediately in 4 years the plutocracy basically used race as a wedge to divide the popular movement. So the popular movement, even was very successful at the beginning, in 4 years it collapsed, because in a way you did not have a way to kind of bridge that. However, when you come with your preconceived oligarchic, mentality that comes from, all the media that you're consuming, then you can actually cross information with your neighbors at the local level. And those people you will know if you meet regularly. And this is something that also is identity formation based, is regularity. The same as, and here Machiavelli, in book 3 of the Discourses, basically he sees how republic and religions have kind of the same logic. They're born, they have a kind of an origin, they need kind of constant renewal, and they also need constant the renewal of vows. In a way, you need to have a habit, you need to have rituals, you need to have something that forces people to come together and engage in something together in a way. And that is something that could allow for better relations and deeper relations with your neighbors, instead of being atomized as we are now. We're consuming all this media by ourselves in a way, and we are in bubbles. Instead of crossing information, say, hey, I received this video, what do you think about that? Oh no, that's fake news. I can tell you by experience that is not. So you have some kind of counter action to that fake news in a way. If you try to do it, of course, it would be better to do it through education as well, in a way, a formal education. But I've been trying to do that with YouTube classes on constitutionalism for the masses, in a way. And that is something that technology allows for. If someone is willing to, impart those classes and are free, and you could, have a platform where people can access that, that would be a way of educating people in a formal level in order to better be citizens at the local level and fight back against the divisions that the few are trying to impose. But if we think about, taxing the wealthy, if you're thinking about the billionaire tax, it's very difficult for someone who is not a billionaire to actually not be in favor of that. So, and that kind of common cause is kind of divided and undermined by all the other stuff that is going on in the news, in a way, and all the polarization and division. But when you have kind of a single issue like that, you can actually do that. And when I was talking about populist democracy, in a way, you need a form of popular power that will break through the oligarchic stronghold. If you're going to have a wealth tax and you're really going to bridge inequality and use that money for transitioning to a more ecological state, to empower the people, to end poverty and all these things, you really need someone to put their foot down, in a way, and force that on the system. And that's what we need. And I think that is achievable, since 80% of the population worldwide do not own any property, or almost no property whatsoever. So I think we have a critical mass to be able to do this.
Thank you. And that answer also touches on a second question I had for you. You hinted at the oligarchic kind of nature of parties and how the oligarchy has really taken root within parties. I guess one other worry is there's a strategic choice one has to make in plebeian politics what to do about parties, right? One answer is, well, they're so deeply oligarchic at their very root that we're better off thinking of plebeian politics outside of these structures. And then there's the other route, the kind of Fabio Wolkenstein sort of route, saying, well, historically there was this element of anti-elite role they could perform, and we seem to have lost that. And part of what we need to do is revive it. And we might add a realist kind of spin to it to say, given that parties are these super powerful political kind of cogs in this wheel, there's just we don't want to go up against them. The best thing you want to do is co-opt them to do plebeian politics. And I wondered if you had a view on that? Can we co-opt parties into implement politics, or is this just something we're going to have to work without?
I think we're way past working with parties. Parties are oligarchic machines. We see it in the UK. The Labour Party that came from Labour is actually, going imposing austerity politics. So this is something that, of course, is a kind of corruption of the party itself. And we see the projection or the evolution of all organizations. And here I based, on the insight of Robert Michels in the beginning of the 20th century on the iron law of oligarchy. Any organization that has a base and leadership, it basically the gap grows, and at the end the leadership just escapes in a way and rules in a way, and only the interaction with the mass is very sparse. It's very limited. So I would say that but still, as you say, we need to be realists. We cannot be idealists and say, okay, let's do this extra legal thing and, go and live in our hippie community. That is not going to change the world. It's going to make our life, if you are engaged in that, a little bit better. But still, the probability of that experiment to fail is very high if you are alone, right? So in a way, you need to change the world. So how do you see it? How do you do it? You need to use what is available. And so therefore, I would say we need to create a new kind of party. The party that Rosa Luxemburg envisioned in the What Does the Spartacus League Want? So the Spartacus party, the uprising party, that is a party that is not making decisions, but is a delegate, is an instrument of the people. And this is a new way of conceiving the party. And I came very close to helping out with the development of such a party in Chile. There's the pirate movement, the pirate party. There's a few of them around the world. And they are the anti-party. They want to be kind of a party that is different. So this movement in Chile is very strong. It is in favor of universal knowledge, of, against patents and all this kind of like enclosing of knowledge, of power. They believe in like fluid democracy, and they are very horizontal in their structure. So they asked me if I could devise for them a structure of the horizontal party. And of course, you cannot be completely horizontal, and you cannot get rid of the people that founded the movement and that they're there basically giving all their time, because this is the reality. We have like professional activists in a way that have devoted their lives to the movement, and they want to be involved in a manner that is not you're going to rotate out and maybe you will never have a role. You can have a kind of mixed constitution in which you can have the kind of the council of the party that is going to direct the party. It's going to be the admin of the party, needs to be mixed, can be kind of like traditional. The people, the founders, as a few in this structure, and then have the majority of the people making decisions as a rotating basis, coming from below, from the different chapters of the party. Also understanding leadership not as individual but as collective, as working groups. So you don't, or the problem is that the system forces you to have a leader, force you to have someone on the ballot. But you can have in your internal structure the idea that that candidate is elected with a working group that can control them in a way internally. So therefore, you need to have internal structures that offset the oligarchic tendencies of the parties themselves, which are all based on elections, all based on loyalties, and there's little that the membership does in that party. So I think we cannot get rid of parties. They exist. They're oligarchic machines. We cannot co-opt those parties because, again, with Condorcet, if we try to co-opt the oligarchic power, we will always be in the minority. And if you are even 20% of the Congress or 20% of the party, you have no power within because the power are majority. So it's very difficult to actually aspire to be the majority in that party. But you can create a different party that could be able to actually get a majority because it represents, it's a delegate. It's like the spokes institution of the people and not really an oligarchic structure. So that I would say that is the most realist way to allow for the interface, because the interface is the most difficult thing. You can create structures that are parallel, but how are they going to interact with the existing structure? This is where all the power is, basically.
Perfect. Thanks. I'll just see if Rochna wants to come in, and we can go back to Maciej as well.
Thank you. Thank you for a fantastic presentation and a really inspiring vision, which, as Udit was saying, I also find very persuasive and compelling. And I suppose it's just thinking along with you and in a sense, a question that we all face, and it comes up. It's come up in some ways, in different ways, in Udit and Maciej's questions as well, which is how do we get there to introducing this sort of foreign body within this sort of a system, right? So it's given how oligarchic the system is in every institution, including the institutions of resistance, including unions or some of them, etc. And given how much power is controlled by this oligarchic elite, how are given the existing power structures, in other words, how can we be inspired by examples from the past or the present to think of ways in which we can, as it were, get there. So yeah, I'll stop there.
Thank you. Yes, so of course it's the most difficult thing to actually, how do we get there? The epilogue of the book is what is to be done, and I basically say either you rely on an event that you have, like a crisis, like it happened in Chile, that actually you have immediately formation of infrastructure of different institutions and networks and coordination, is happening in a way, or you do it through a leader in a way. It's either the one or the many together that will basically change the world in this way. However, and that's, I already said, I think you cannot aspire to do it at the national level. It's just too difficult, because basically it is just far away and it is too much power. However, you can do it in experiment sites in a way at the municipality level. I think the neighborhood level is the level that people, because in order for you to have power as an individual, you need to be able to be close to power. Proximity to power is crucial. So if the power is in the assembly, you need to be there in a way. You cannot just delegate that, cannot be by proxy. If it's far away, you cannot really control, you have your daily life. But if you are, in a habit of meeting, you actually can hold the line in a way. What I would say is more important to getting there in terms of incorporating into the legal order is that whatever institution we create, it has to be in conformity with the formal rules of the game. You cannot just include, for example, one of the neo-Republican thinkers, they argue for these plebeian institutions to be class-based in the sense of wealth-based. So if you have amount of money, you're excluded from it. Or if you are poor enough, you can be part of it in a way. And of course, that makes sense in the sense of kind of creating an identity that is really class-based. But of course, it would be unconstitutional. You cannot really give more political rights to one part of the population and not another. This is what we did, at the beginning of democracy, in which only the people with enough wealth could actually vote and be, selected for office. So I don't think we need to go and to invert that and go, back to that, because that would create a lot of antibodies. And I use kind of like the metaphor of the body in terms of if you're going to have a transplant and you're going to kind of incorporate a foreign object, it needs to be as compatible as possible in order to flourish. It's like, and John McCormick, who is the other theorist, and we have been talking about this is about putting the foot on the door. You need an opening in a way. And for me, that opening has to be... we need to be very careful about the interface, about making the decisions binding. And this is the most problematic thing, because of course, government will tolerate alternative forms of organization, and they will just weigh them out in a way. Time is on their side, because in a way, when you are meeting and you have no results and you have no power, people will not meet, because why are you wasting your time going somewhere if nothing's going to happen? So the people that say, well, people do not want to organize, they don't go to the assembly. Yes, because they have no power. If you had power, you would be there. If it counts, you will be there. So in a way, you need to find that power. And the powers that we have seen in history, how binding power works, is through referenda. So you could have referenda at the local level, because in a way, of course, not all people will meet in councils. And if you have an ecosystem that incorporates unions and other, local organizations, how can you say that those organizations are sovereign in a way and will be deciding if basically more than half of the population maybe will not be interested at the beginning, right? They will not know that actually this has power. So we need to think about mechanisms that already exist, that are proven in a way, that you could allow for these decisions made at the local level to be binding. So you can, for example, edit the municipal code to say, well, if the assemblies, and if there's an issue that we need to be resolved, the mayor can call the assemblies, at the local level to deliberate, and whatever decision comes out, it will be put to a referendum. And then after that, the people at large will decide yes or no. And there you have a binding power. So in a way, it cannot be just that those assemblies are in themselves, the sovereign and binding, but there are mechanisms that we already have tried out to allow for that. And we use those mechanisms as an individual mechanisms. And that's why they don't work. Because when we vote in a referendum without previous deliberation at the local level in a collective fashion, in a way, we are just voting of our preference, our taste, our private opinion. And that really can be shaped by media and by oligarchic power very easily, in a way. The only way to go past that and really kind of get informed about what is being voted and have a critical stance and approve or reject based on that is through deliberation. So you could have deliberative days, in a way, for the people to get that kind of information, and then do a kind of a public campaign for referendum. The other side, the other kind of path we can use is the path of the citizen assemblies, which have been basically voluntary consulting, bodies that have no power. Some of the organizations are trying actually to bridge that gap and to create kind of the citizen assembly that could be called by lottery to resolve specific issues, and then to kind of force the municipality with, a referendum to actually make that binding. I would say that just staying in the citizen assembly progress in terms of non-binding power and being only there to offer an opinion is just wasting our time. Because in a way, it is undermining the citizen assembly process in a way. We need to really think about democracy as people's power. So if something doesn't bring us power, it's not really worth it. So I think we need to think of in those ways.
Perfect. Thanks, Camila. That also speaks really well to recent work which started thinking of federalism as federalism itself as a laboratory for constitutional experimentation, and that's really helpful. I wondered if Maciej wanted to come back on any of the points you raised, Maciej.
Thank you. Yeah, it was very informative and very inspiring, I would say. And I just wanted to ask, as I said before in my comments, that I like it a lot how you connect the economic question to the more political or formal question of division of power or control of power. But now, on the other hand, while listening to what you followed up on, but also agreeing very much about it, but I have some doubts, or rather thoughts, or unanswered question, how we should address the economic power more clearly here, because I think what is very much the problem of oligarchic republics is that they actually outsource the power and outsource the regulation to the economic sphere and to the private sphere, right? So when a lot of regulation or a lot of daily politics actually is being decided by economic actors or business actors, and they are sort of proxies of power. Or maybe looking from the other way around, is that our formal political institutions are subordinated to economic power very often. So my question would be how this mobilization and this grassroots solidarity how it could resist this more economic power. So I can even very illustratively maybe imagine that, you know, when you establish this grassroots solidarity and the councils, you would suddenly have companies and businesses that would capitalize on it and would commercialize it, and would maybe you would have some companies that can even better you know, even more effectively make a council system as you wish, and then to use it in their way and according to the market logic. So I mean, this capitalist capitalist tendency and predicament of really colonizing all the spheres of our activity and our public activity, how to resist it, and what we should rely on when we want to design such councils. Again, maybe not really vis-a-vis the political parties or political system, but very much vis-a-vis the economic power, purely understood.
Well, this is an old question, of course. When we think about Marxism, you have this division, of course, the politics and economics. And for the Marxist, the economic realm should be prompting the political. So the political is just a derivative of the economic structure. And of course, this is a descriptive thing, you know, and then you have, you know, the idea that you need to kind of colonize the political, you know, process in order to, or the state in order to impose a different economic system. However, I would say I am from the other way around, in the sense that we already, or not the other way around, but we already have, you know, economic system, as you say, that is really unequal, that you have, you know, the private sphere really writing the law, and outsourcing has really kind of get the power away from political institutions, because they are, you know, you cannot really change the rules in a way. It is your hands are tied. So how can we go back to forcing the hand of those who are tied in a way? And for me, having, first of all, thinking about this network of popular assemblies, however we define them, as having a scope that is general in a way, because one of the strategies to basically undermine the popular power is to say, okay, we're going to have, you know, assemblies, or, you know, local government based on the people, but only in this realm, only about, you know, local taxes, only about, you know, this and that, but not about constitutional law, not about taxation in general. A laundry list of exclusions that are the basis of the system. However, when you think about these organizations as having a broader scope, be able to attend any of the regulations, then you can think about really inverting or breaking the oligarchic stronghold. For example, today in the UK, we have a huge problem with water. Water was privatized, and we have the dirtiest water in Europe. The bills are going up by 40%, and basically the companies that have bought, you know, the water system are almost bankrupt. So basically now taxpayers are subsidizing the profit of or the revenue of these companies. So now there's kind of a push for nationalizing the water system, because basically the companies have forfeited their role by dumping raw sewage in the ocean, and really polluting everything. So, but the government says, well, we have contracts, we cannot really do that. And we have hands are tied, and then the water companies are lobbying and pouring money into the system. So therefore, there's no way that this is going to change. However, if you give that power to the people, and we say, well, we're going to nationalize water, and you have a one line, do you agree with nationalizing the water system? Yes or no? And if you say yes, well, there's no other choice in a way. You need to actually do it. How are you going to do it? This is a different story. And of course, then we will think about the monitoring institutions that both Machiavelli and Condorcet had in mind. Because it's not only about nationalizing water, it's about the ways that you nationalize it. Are you going to pay the company back? Are you going to buy it from them in a way? Then it's going to be millions of pounds, and you cannot do it. You cannot really subsidize the profit of the oligarchs. So that devil is in the details, and that is something that we really need to think about. Again, the cap on wealth This is something that can be done only, I would say, through popular power. So we need to think about how there are some rules and some things that we can change at the base of the system that would never change through representative institutions because they're co-opted in a way, and that could be a game changer. In Chile, we had the Constituent Assembly, and there was all this idea of, Chile, 70% of the GDP is minerals, basically, that are exported, and they are owned by foreign corporations. Little is given to Chile. The majority of thing is all the money goes abroad. So there is a push from the very beginning, from the Allende period, 1970s, to nationalize the industry, and there was a division here of nationalizing the raw material and nationalizing the industry, right? And even though the material, copper, is national, as understood as a national resource, all the infrastructure and the mine itself is private or is leased to 100 years. So therefore, there is a kind of covert privatization of the industry through this kind of like separation. So in the convention, the regular people were saying, we need to nationalize it. We want everything to stay in-house in a way. We can do this in a way. And that was the kind of there was a push, and was not at the end was not successful, because the lobbyism from especially Germany, the Germans invest a lot in kind of environmental organizations in Chile. So they would give money with strings attached. They said, well, you can fight for the environment, but you cannot push for nationalizing, the industry, because that would go against our own interests. So basically, there was a limit to what could you do because of the funding from abroad, in a way. So, but if you give that power to the people, that would be a game changer to nationalize industry and to put wealth tax. And even though you still have capitalism, you are giving, so through this kind of game-changing rules, you're giving popular institutions a narrative and a history of empowerment, that you can actually change things. And you need to start from the things that are more pressing and not, go to change the whole thing. Because we are indoctrinated into private property. We have, our aspirations of becoming millionaires and being YouTubers. At least this is like my teenage son, basically. It's like, oh, I don't want to work. I don't want to be in a cubicle. I just want to be a YouTuber and earn millions. And this is like this fantasy, right? So you cannot just go full on, let's go and, obliterate the system. For me, it is not respectful and it's not democratic. We need to give the people the gas and the stop in a way. They need to be able to forward when they need to, and actually hold the line and be conservative when they want to, and go and do this kind of revolutionary change at their own pace, but in their own terms in a way. And this is the way that I envision that could change. It cannot change overnight, because that would be very traumatic, and also because the oligarchs have all the money and all the power. And you need to remember that the police, so the forces of order all around the world, were born to protect private property. At the beginning, they were basically private militias, and then they became part of the public. But we see today for the police going and protecting, for example, the oil corporations from being sabotaged or from protests. So basically, they're arresting citizens by exercising their freedom of speech just to protect the company. So we see that the forces of order are used as the militia of the oligarchs. So it's very dangerous to just kind of go and try to kind of change things from the top. It needs to be from the bottom, and in a gradual manner, not pace by pace, but by issue, in a way that could be game changers, could be foundational, such as the nationalization of industry and the wealth tax.
Thanks. Are there other questions?
And of course, all these issues are not constitutional. And this is what, with this I finished. In Chile, there was all this discussion from constitutional lawyers and regular people saying, well, you cannot really put nationalized industry through the constitution, because this is not a constitutional matter. And of course, my answer is like, everything is constitutional matter, because the Constitution is the most political of all documents. It's not a legal document. Legality comes after, in a way, the derivative of that norm, but that is decided through political judgment alone. It cannot be a derivative of something else, in a way. So we cannot judge a priori what is a constitutional matter and what is not, in a way.
Yeah, if I may to jump, yeah, indeed. I mean, this is, I think, what's also is sort of a doubt, my doubt about many theories of deliberation, like constitutional deliberation, that actually the very topics that are being discussed, or the very matters what are constitutional, are already set and given to discuss, right? But I think the really political constitutional question is also to decide on the very topics, or the very what belongs to constitutional values, or what belongs to constitutional themes or constitutional questions. I think what is really important is who decides on it, yeah, and how we propose the topics for discussion, and not only the rules of discussion, or not only the inclusion in discussion.
Yeah, I agree completely. And that's why I connect the power of the people to constituent power. And this counter infrastructure of power as something that is not really derivative from, the government and the legality, is really something that is a creative power that has some bounds, because it has, interaction. So the rules of the game are defined by deliberation rules, in a way. Equality, freedom of speech, all these things are embedded in the way you deliberate, in a way, and therefore are foundational. You cannot go against that, in a way. But in a way, you need to think about this power as a constituent, as something that can change the order, that can legitimately reform to the core the order, and not really just tweak around the edges. And I completely agree that is who decides on what are the topics. And another thing that I didn't talk about on your question too, in terms of the experts, because if we're going to deliberate, we need knowledge. We need scientific knowledge, in a way. We need also testimonies. We need information for us to make an informed decision. And the devil is in the experts, in a way, because if you're going to bring only experts from one side, or you're not going to bring, accurate information and it's biased information, therefore your deliberation process is going to be flawed. So this is where also the eye needs to be in how to create processes in which this doesn't happen or cannot be co-opted by, one side. And therefore information needs to be open, in a way, and has to be curated in a manner that is flexible and dynamic, in a way that you're not imposing a worldview and one side of things, because that immediately people run away and are against that thing, in a way. We need to really learn how to think for ourselves, in a way. And that is a very difficult thing to do.
I had one final comment, and then I'll hand it over to Camila for closing comments as well. I found it really useful, Camila, to read your book alongside Sam Bagg's book, because I think there are, to use a slightly cliched term, synergies there, right? Your book really gives us a template for the kind of institutions that plebeian politics would require, and Sam's book is telling us how we might get there, organizing for power, building these cross-cutting connections, kind of glossing over artificial cleavages and building people's power. And I wondered if you might be able to speak to some of those themes, the idea of organizing for power and the role of activists, for example, in there. But yes, I will hand over to you for closing comments.
Yes. So one of the problems with organizing the old way that we have been organizing is that it's very leadership based. And we have kind of professional activists that suck all the oxygen out of the organization. And this is something that I have seen on the ground everywhere. And of course, there are the people that keep moving. There are people that are self-driven, right? That they're the ones who go to all the meetings. If you go to union meetings, there's always someone there that is always there, that is always trying to make it work, that, and we need those people. However, our way of organizing have allowed those people to have more authority. and for them to think of themselves as more authoritative because they have been, they have dedicated their lives to this. And the problem is that this old school way of organizing is demobilizing, because the majority of the people have no role whatsoever, have never been involved. And if they think that go to a meeting and it's already been said by these actors that are great, then why am I here? What is my role? So part of my consulting in the assemblies and unions in Chile was to basically force the professional activists to take the back seat, to basically push from behind, from below in a way, to allow others to speak first, to allow others to, do a exchange of ideas that they don't need to be correct. There is, in this activists, there is a correct way of doing things. And there is a sectarianism that comes with the organizing, that old organizing based on kind of left-wing politics, if you will. And I think today we're past that. It's very difficult to organize from that space because it is seen as sectarian. You cannot get rid of those organizations, though are active, but you need to allow for a new way of organizing that is really horizontal and is bringing people together, that is gender, and there's gender parity, there's rules that we have to incorporate in order to do not allow for the inequalities that are outside of the system to permeate the assemblies, because we are all, indoctrinated into patriarchy, into capitalism, into hierarchy and elitism. We all are, creatures of this world in a way. So we need, again, to think about in a defensive manner and also in an empowering manner. And that empowering means that the activists, need to be quiet, and they need to speak at the end. This was my first thing. I used Bernie Sanders' progressive stack system, in which when he goes to has a conference, he said, okay, questions, and he opens the floor for questions, and then he makes a list of the people that raised their hand, and always gives the first go to a person that either never speaks, is a woman, or someone from a minority, and not to the usual, male person that it basically knows it all, and will speak very truthfully about things. But then everybody else will be quiet because they will think that everything has been said. The same as we think about in the classroom. If you are in the classroom and you want your students to participate in a debate, and you have an open question, if you call the first person that you call is your best student, then everybody else will be quiet, because that student will nail it. And this is not the point. It's not about nailing it. It's about the process of deliberation and getting comfortable of expressing your own opinions in a manner that is acceptable to others, in a way that is not aggressive, and all these things. We need to learn how to deliberate. And for that, we need to exercise that muscle. So activists turn to kind of be more epistemic and say, no, this is the correct way, or the truth, of the matter. We have been here for 20 years. We're entitled to lead this. No, in order to lead it, you need to from behind or from below, in a way. So in my consultancy at the beginning, there were meetings of, 10, 12 people, and it was very small. And they were all complaining that people, even if new people came to the meetings, they would not stick, in a way. They had no kind of traction. So after my talk, I would say, please implement this. And the moment they implemented, 3 months later, they will call me, and they had tripled their size. And the majority of people speaking were women, and they were all kind of, there was an effervescence. And of course, the regular activists were there, but they were being more humble and taking a back seat. So I would say, do not bring the old ways of organizing into, they're very, very elitist in a way. The left can be very elitist. So don't bring that into the new. We need to look at what didn't work and actually create some new space, because we're new people. We are not in the 70s. There was no kind of that political culture. We are in a plain consumerism culture. So we need to start again, in a way, and start empowering people that are not knowledgeable. So democracy is about, equal ignorance, if you will, equal qualities. There's no anybody more qualified than others. And this, we need to kind of make it material, in a way, in our way of organizing.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. All that's left for us to do is to thank Camila for a fascinating introduction, defense of her book, and to Maciej for your excellent comments. Thank you so much to the two of you. Please do read Systemic Corruption, Constitutional Ideas for an Anti-Oligarchic Republic. I think one of the big virtues of this book is it's a perfect blend of cynicism and utopia. It's cynicism about representative government, about the material base of political power at present, but utopia about the possibilities that could be, about possibilities that we could revive from the past to use in our times. It's also a perfect blend, I think, of academic scholarship, but also reflections on Camila's activism and experience in the real world. For all those reasons, I would strongly recommend reading the book. And for those of you listening in, we hope you enjoyed the conversation, and we'll join the conversation on the Anti-Oligarchic Republic. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for an excellent session.
Thank you. All right.